what I really wanted to bring together in all of this teaching and talking is why are we doing all this? What is really the overall point of studying the sutras and meditation and yoga practice? What occurred to me is really what we're trying to do is to quit being insane. Because if you think about it, when we went around yesterday and we asked each of you, why aren't you at peace? A lot of you knew why you weren't at peace, but you still kept doing the things which prevented the peace from occurring. So basically, that's the point of all this. What we're doing is we're learning to get to that place where we have self-awareness, because we have to remember self-awareness, in accord with the sutras, is what ends suffering. It ends those root causes of pain. The more self-awareness we have, the more we're able to stop the pain in our life. Now, once we have the self-awareness, the next step is to start identifying all those things that we do, experience, or allow into our life, so that we can say, look, why do I keep doing this? And it may not be that you always know why you keep doing it, but the fact that you have that little inkling of self-awareness, and you can keep curiously wondering, why do I keep doing this, until you get the answer. Once you get the answer, the real answer, the answer that is the truth under all of the situations in the matter, that's when you will probably stop doing it, because you will know and you will understand. Or you will be conscious enough to say to yourself, well, on some level I enjoy this, even if it seems odd. And as long as you can say, on some level I enjoy doing this, then you are still doing it consciously. And you are doing it because you have a choice, not because you have a compulsion or an aversion. Meaning you're not trying to get away from something, or you're not trying to make something happen. So always keep in mind, whenever something's causing you pain or a problem, if you have that ability to step back, even if you have to meditate for a bit, and then you're in a clearer space, you can ask, what is really the issue behind all this? And you either get the answer, or you keep inquiring until you eventually get the answer. But the point is, you don't stop until you figure it out. Because if you stop before you figure it out, you are essentially arresting your development. And remember, we're endeavoring to grow psychologically healthy, so that we're psychologically healthy and happy. Now, this is weird to a lot of people, because just like with Amy's example, with the women that were talking about your appearance and whatnot, right? To them, that seemed perfectly normal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was just like,
yeah.
This makes perfect sense.
Other people in the Philippines too, sorry to interrupt, but
No.
I was getting my hair cut, and the guy who was cutting my hair was like, is this your natural hair color? And I was like, yeah. Y'all have been dyeing your hair for so long that you guys forget that we have black hair. Is what I'm thinking. And it's like, is that your natural eye color? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, well, at the end, whenever he finished cutting my hair, it's like, well, maybe next time, we'll do something with your hair. Yeah.
Yeah, because to them it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the important thing, is to remember that there are cultures and people that have these ideas about things. And just like us right here, right now, right, we share a common thread of thought, which is why all this makes sense to us. And all this also boils down to the idea of shoulds and shouldn'ts. We think things should be this way, or they should not be this way. But what we really should do is make peace with the way things are, right? Because this is a variation of another saying. You can should in one hand and shit in the other, and see which one fills up first. So the shoulds don't really. The shoulds only make you more unhappy. One woman I know, I forget who she's really interested in, but when she would work with people, if something traumatic happens or something happens that someone doesn't like, the response is always, oh, well, they shouldn't have done that, or it shouldn't be that way. And this woman would say, well, how do you know that? And she'd say, well, just because. She's like, well, it's that way. It did happen that way. So obviously that's the way it should have been. If something has happened a certain way, like that's the way it should have been. And just because our minds can't make peace with that, or it's different than what we think the way it's supposed to be, that doesn't change the reality. And so the whole point is insanity is trying to change reality.
It's sort of like what people say, because it's something that really frustrates me from a counseling perspective. Well, they were doing the best they could at that time. You don't know, because I will say to someone, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know they were? Maybe they weren't, and that's okay. You just have to accept that they weren't, and you were in a different place and move forward. Because it's what, to me, it seems like, I always feel like when people say that to me, it's like a tool to stay in the past.
I mean, I can think of many things that I've done stupid, and people would say to me, "Oh, you were doing the best you could." And it's like, no, I wasn't. I wasn't doing the best I could. So yeah, you definitely don't know.
Kind of makes you wonder what the definition of best is, though.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, like maybe in the version of yourself then, maybe it was, could be like on the flip side when you're looking at it because of what capacity you had. I'm not sure.
Right.
Well, at 22, I think your best is going to be really different than at 32, because you have life experience to fill in.
Well, what's the here's the question. What's the idea of the best you could, right? But why do we need to like label it in the first place? Like going with that idea of things just happen. Like why? And I'm curious. Your thoughts. Why isn't it just that just happened and it sucked or it was great versus that happened because of this? Why is it? Why do you feel we always need to put that because of either before or after it?
Maybe it's linked in a way or another to what we were talking about earlier as to why our society or people in general just feel like they need to put a label to anything.
But why though? I mean,
I don't know.
what is like? How does that change? What does that do?
It justifies it in some ways, maybe, like just in your mind that, I did the best I could, it wasn't so good, but, I could be okay with it, maybe?
Gives it a reason.
And so what's that do though? Like,
I feel like it takes it off yourself.
Oh.
It does in some ways. I mean, I can imagine that I've even said that, so well, I'm doing the best I can.
Right.
But really, I'm just doing what I do. I have a lot of insight from this group, from things that, even to say, I want Hudson to talk to me because I want somebody to talk to is pretty big.
Right.
Like my needs projecting onto him for him to be somebody else was a pretty big insight.
Right.
I didn't really think that before. I was just being the mom. So, I really understand what you're saying.
Well, so I like what Jackie said though. It takes the responsibility off. But if you think about it, even if you don't put it on there in the first place, there's still no responsibility.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
That would be better.
But it's interesting. Maybe it's just because we like the stories, right? I mean, we like to have a story to tell. But why do we like that? I mean, of course, these are all things that everyone does, so there must be a reason.
Because it gives us identity, shows where we are in the world. I mean, if we label things around us, then we know where we fit in and all that. That's important though.
So it gives us identity. What does it? What gets the identity?
Labels.
But labels, yeah, that's an identity. But I mean, like, so if we have a story and we tell it, and you're saying something is getting an identity out of that, what is that is getting the identity? Like, what is the thing that is now has something to be an identity? You can't find it. You see what I'm saying? The reason I'm bringing that up is because it's just like if something happens and you lay a story on it to take away sort of maybe some sort of responsibility or something that takes away responsibility. But if you never lay the story in the first place, there's still no sense of taking away responsibility because you don't need to take away responsibility. And if we're trying to make something an identity, well, that thing obviously already exists and it doesn't need an identity to exist. Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
So,
But in some ways, you're also saying
Uh-huh.
and so you're going to think back on, you know, your patterns and the stories that you're creating.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you don't create the stories in the first place, then what are the questions? You know,
That's exactly, yes. if,
Or maybe that's the point.
yes, that's right. I like that. If you don't create the stories, then what are the questions? So I guess that leads back around to, why do I keep asking this question? Or why even ask the question? Why do people ask these questions? Why am I asking this question?
Know ourselves.
To what?
Know ourselves.
To know ourselves, okay.
You know, have the self-awareness.
Quit being insane, like you said.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and the insanity aspect, it's,
It feels like there's just something programmed in us to need to know why we're here, what we're doing,
uh-huh.
like what the point is, what the purpose is.
And what is it? Here's an interesting question. The idea of purpose, because it does go along with this whole idea of insanity. Who gives, like when something happens and then there is a purpose to it, who determines that? And I'm not talking about existential philosophical, I mean just really basic. What or who is the thing that determines that?
Wouldn't it be us?
Yeah. So each of us determine why something occurs. We don't think of it that way, though, do we? If something occurs, we come up with a purpose or a meaning, and we say, this occurred because of that. It doesn't need to be there, though, does it, right? The purpose, this happened because of that. It doesn't need to be there. It makes us feel comfortable for some reason, but it doesn't need to be there. But the point that I'm trying to bring around here is that each of you, each of us, each individual person, we are in charge of our own meaning. You know, even if we identify with a church or a religion or a group of some sort, then we are just identifying with what they say is a meaning, and then we continue to overlay that meaning over everything that we do. But we are the one doing it. But if we would pull away from that organization, that group, or that number of people, we might find that it had nothing to do with that at all, and it probably doesn't. But we can continue to overlay our own meaning on things. And so if you want to have a meaning to life or a purpose to life, it needs to be your own. That's really what I'm trying to bring around here. Because it's that way anyway. We just want to make it more conscious. But what I want to know is, does that feel comfortable? Does that feel comfortable to all of you to do that? To decide that you are the ones that are going to decide what is meaningful? And if not, why? Yeah, and if not, why?
I think it's true. I mean, I'm not affiliated with any church, and for a long time I didn't have any spirituality in quotes,
But what about friends and groups that you belong to? I'm not talking some.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be an official.
Yeah.
Just.
It's a hard question because I think I am influenced by so much.
Uh huh.
So even my perception of things has been influenced by my experiences and who I hang out with and what I do. So
Right.
I don't know that I can separate that. Actually, I don't know how I would do that.
Right.
Like how I would separate myself from my experiences and my influences.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, going back to what we've been talking about with the Yoga Sutras and so on, when we get that self-awareness and we get that ability to sort of pull back and see what's going on, that's when we can start to see those patterns. And that's just part of the process, that as you go through and you get more self-awareness, you start to realize, oh, I've been influenced in this way. And we're not talking judgmentally or bad, it's just you just notice. And then you're able to say, okay, am I all right with this or not? And then make changes. But the key there is to have that self-awareness, to know that you are the one making the choice.
And that if you like what you're being influenced with, it's okay to make that choice.
Right.
It's not like trying to not have any influence.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Because if you're in this, if we're interacting in this world, me looking at you, you looking at me, and so on, we have to have some sort of, interface to communicate with. So it's fine. but it's the idea of bringing more consciousness to it so that we can see it. And you see, because then if we can see it, when we make a choice, there's no one else to blame but ourselves. I mean, there's never anyone else to blame but ourselves anyway. But I mean, really, we can't attack or strike out at anyone else because, you know, we made the choice.
That seems like a truism as far as goes for me. I think every day I kind of reevaluate who I am, and I'm the only one that can really do that.
Right.
And getting perspective, like you mentioned, whether it's going to church or taking a walk in the woods or talking to a friend that you trust, just kind of opens it up, and you can see where you do fit in into the big picture.
Right.
And then a lot of those choices were your choices,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're not a victim.
Right. Why? Because if I would say this to someone else, that the meaning is dependent on you. Like if I would just say it to anyone walking down the street, or a lot of people that, you know, just in society and so on, they would almost take that. I found that they would almost take that as an attack. Like, what are you talking about? You know, that's ridiculous. You know, how could you say that? Why is that? Why do you think that's a response that people give?
Because when you say something like that, it sounds like it's 100%.
What do you mean?
And, well, we talked yesterday that we don't do anything that we don't want to do, or what we do because it makes us happy,
Right.
good or bad,
Mhm.
or that we need it somehow for our personal growth.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone says, I was 100% responsible for who I am, my place in the world, and my own happiness, I think for a lot of people it's maybe, well, mostly, but maybe only 80%.
Mhm.
20% is my environment.
Mm-hmm.
Or 60-40 or 90-10.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
But I mean, people don't like absolutes.
Right.
I don't think.
And death, I think, is the first absolute we hit in our life.
What's that?
Death.
Oh, right.
I think,
Oh, yeah.
you know, not to go back to the death. But it's that first, you know, you were saying absolutisms are really hard, and they really are, and death is one of those for the human brain. Like, okay, so now I'm not going to see this person physically again. You know, like whatever your belief system is, you may see them in other forms, but, you know, for the absolute part, I'm not going to see that person again. I'm not going to speak to that person again. I'm not going to physically know that person, you know, so it's an absolute that we have to sort of sort out through story.
I think birth would be our first, but
Yeah.
we can't,
Yeah.
our memories can't kind of get into that.
Go back to
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the birth idea, that's a really great point, because with birth, it's, you know, obviously the other end of death, but just like most people can't contemplate what happens after death, well, you know, a meditation is actually to what's going to be like after I'm dead, right? Well, that sounds kind of morbid, but you know, there's the idea of what was it like before I was born. That's not so morbid. I mean, to most people, but it's the same thing. That's interesting. Huh, that's nice. Thank you. Huh. Yeah, but that still hits that wall, that absolute wall, you know, because you know, or you somewhat remember, you know, once you were born forward, but you don't remember before born. But you have a sense that you were there, right? I mean, I know that sounds strange, but you have a sense that you existed even before that.
as some form of energy.
Yeah, and maybe the sense is the sense is that you haven't not existed. So it doesn't mean that you existed before birth. It was just that. Have any of you ever had the sense, when you really try to contemplate it, that you have not existed at some point? Has that ever been a possibility for you?
I think that we do place meaning on things, and then that gets us to from point A to point B. I don't know, I haven't really thought too much about like larger scale things, I guess, but I think in just the daily connections of the dots, that leads to larger scales. But so then on the other end, what I've been trying to practice more recently, and I guess maybe over the last few years, I've been doing it more than a lot than like when I was in my early 20s, but just taking things at face value and not putting a meaning to things.
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't know if by deciding to do that, that's a meaning in itself. So that's what's been going on in my mind
Yeah.
about it.
I think that's, I appreciate that. I think that's, you know, one thing I was going to recommend, to see if anyone can try to do it, because it's hard, is spend like a day or two just seeing what happens. It doesn't mean you don't do your normal stuff. It just means that you don't look for a reason why. You don't, try to make something happen. You just, you wake up, you find yourself making your coffee and taking a shower, and then you go to work, and you don't wonder why. You just see what happens and see if it's any different than any other day when you're trying to think about things or make things happen. That's the tricky part, because your mind won't want to do it, because it's probably going to find out that things are going to happen anyway. But that's why I say, just for a day or two, just try to go through life just seeing what happens. And with that same sense, that's the sense that you need to have around it, is just, oh, well, what's going to happen? Like, I wonder what's going to happen. And then, oh, that happened. Okay, now what's going to happen next? Oh, that happened. And then 2 days later, like, wow, the same thing seemed to happen, even though I didn't know what was going to happen. Right?
So do you think that when we start asking why or projecting it, it could be our ego saying?
Right.
So it's sort of a letting go, putting your ego in your back pocket and saying, all right, let's just let it reveal itself and see what's going to come up.
Exactly. And that's the tricky part about this, because you will find that the same things happen. And your ego didn't have to have anything to do with it. It's that sense of control, that I am making this happen. And, there's I wish I remembered it exactly, there's a quote in the Bhagavad Gita, that you are not the doer. And they use the word God. God is the doer. That's it. You think you are the doer, and that's what creates the problem. When you start thinking you are the doer, things get screwed up. But if you just let the doing happen, things work out great. And that goes along with the Tao. It just happens. What is the Tao? It just happens, right? But that hurts. That hurts this sense of self that we have. Just consider this, and in a lot of current sort of spiritual teaching and so on, there's this extreme idea that we just need to completely get rid of our stories. Like, well, why do you need that story? We'll get rid of that story and everything will be great. I don't think we need to go that far. I think as long as we just know it's a story is enough, because whether the story is still going to happen, obviously, but it's this idea of the key is to realize it's the story. Number one, once you know it's the story, you start to get self-awareness. Number two, then you start to realize what you are. And when you realize what you are, and you realize what the story is, that's why all these saints and these sages and these people who experience, they describe it as bliss and peace. It's not like an over-emotional, I'm high on morphine kind of bliss and peace. It's just you just know. You just know. You know what is. And when you know what is, you're not stressed out about it. And then everything feels okay. And even if it doesn't feel okay, it's just a story, and you're still okay. Because there is that thing which they talk about in the Sutras that is untouched by all of this, and that is the real you, right? That is the thing that we try to put all these stories on top of so that it will exist. But the thing is it will exist whether there's a story or not. And adding the story is just like an extra step that causes this pain, and we don't really need it so much.
Or it causes the happiness.
Or it causes the happiness, which in turn causes pain, because we want to hold on to it.
Right. But I also think that, and I like the idea of just realizing it's a story, but not stopping the stories, because it is what helps, that kind of keeps things, and that's why we have a mind.
Right.
And a body.
Yes.
And feelings. It's not to disengage from all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you say, just to realize it's a story, but you can enjoy it and be sad about it and move on. But I don't know. I wouldn't want to get rid of the stories, because it would not feel like I had a life.
Well, you can't get rid of the stories. That's the whole point too.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
They're still going to be there. But one example you can think of is, think about a kid who has a favorite pillow or blankie. He thinks that if he is parted from that thing, all the world's going to go to hell. All right, because he loves that thing. He loves the way that blankie makes him feel. It's nice, it's comfortable, it's warm. So he carries around them everywhere, and he gets dirty and torn up and ratty and these sorts of things. But let's think about it another way. Let's say this little kid knows, I've got this blankie. And it's at home. I can go do my own thing. I can play with friends and go to school. And I come home and my blankie's still there. Right? And so that's sort of what we're aiming to do, is to realize that we have these things that we like. And they will be there in some form or another. But it's when we hold them to us and we never let them go that things start to get torn and screwed up and dirty. Do you see what I'm saying here? So that's this idea of flowing in between the story, but being okay to pull back and just be pure awareness that is aware of nothing. And And that's a very important point, because most people never get to that state in meditation of experiencing their pure being, because they are afraid that if they let go of all this, it's never going to be there again. And from my experience, that's not been true. You go into that state of pure being, there you are, you're done, there it is again. And you just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and eventually you see that it permeates everything. But the point being, if you really want to meditate well, you really need to trust that your problems will still be there, if you want to think about it that way. That your life, that these things that are important to you right now will be there when you get done. And that's the phrase, right now. Because as you change and grow, these things that are so important right now might not be important in a year or so. Clear example, I don't know if I gave you last time, but I was very much involved in a particular organization, CSA, for 10 years. I was all about it. I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to do the teaching, the center, this sort of a thing. I was invested in it. I had to do it. And after 10 years, I realized I didn't want to do it. And that was such a hard thing to admit to myself, because it was so important for 10 years. And even now, as I think about it, having made that change, my meditations are so much deeper. My life is more enjoyable. It feels freer. It's like so many opportunities have opened up. But because I was so invested in it for 10 years, I still have that sort of, did I make the right decision? Even though everything tells me that I made the right decision. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is no lack from making that decision. It's the same thing. As you change and grow, you need to be okay with letting go of what was appropriate for you then and what is appropriate for you now, because there will always be what is appropriate for you now. That's the thing that you can trust, like we were talking about yesterday, Gabby, with the uncertainty. It's uncertain, yes, but one thing you can be certain about is that you will get the thing that you need when you need it, right? Even though you don't know what it is,
Well, it's funny because last night I was journaling this experience, and I wrote down what I was asking for, and I wrote down certain things, certain physical things. And then what happened was last night when I was journaling, I realized, gosh, those answers came to me in this training, and then I got this text from someone I sort of am getting to know, and she was saying this stuff, and I'm like, oh, and then there's that other one too. So it's then the acknowledgement of, yes, you are going to, So this morning in reflection, I was like, look at that. Ryan's right. There's uncertainty, but then the certainty, the universe sort of shows back up, and there's, the answer or the whatever.
Well, and the thing to remember with all that is...
And then it's going to change.
Well, that too. But it's a clear example of the fact that there is only one thing. Like, you say Ryan is right. Ryan had no idea what Ryan was saying. Ryan was just teaching a Yoga Sutras class, okay? And your friend probably didn't know, And so, and that happened to me even when I was visiting my folks. I met with one of my friends, and I was contemplating something. I hadn't talked to this guy in 6 months. Like, oh, by the way, I'm reading this book, and this is what it talks about. And he answered every question. He had no idea. And so it's this idea that, there's the idea that we need to get the answers ourselves, like they need to just appear out of our heart and meditation. But if we can trust that this is all of it too, and we can listen to what's around us, even a TV show can seemingly say something that speaks to your situation. There's the idea of us as a little being. And I guess the idea of self-responsibility is the same, because we want this little being to make all the choices, or we want this little being to not be responsible or be responsible, whichever we want to go with it. But what we realize is that there is a hell of a lot more to us than just what we are aware of. And that is unknown to our mind, but the more we meditate, the more we practice yoga, the more we do our best to clear out the impurities within us, we start to realize that all of this is us, and we take care of ourselves, and that we don't have to know the inner workings of everything, because it will come around somehow. Do you see what I'm saying here? There's when you're asking a question, or when you're trying to figure something out or do something, if you have the trust that the rest of you is taking care of it, you do what you can, with your body and with your skills and whatnot. But if you can trust that the rest of you that you're not aware of is taking care of it, you'll find out that it does, right? That's kind of the point. just like your body, you don't know that you don't know all the trillions of processes that your body is doing just to allow you to sit here for 5 minutes, and understand words and make sense of all these crazy patterns, around here, and the smells and the sounds. I mean, for us to be able to do that, it's not happening consciously, but we're aware of it. It's the same thing. There's so much more going on that we are not aware of, but it doesn't matter because it is supportive of our meaning. And if we get into that state, or we accept it, or we learn how to be it, or appreciate it, then the insanity dies away. Because there's no more need to make something up, unless we want to. There's no more need to get stressed about things. There's no more need to say, this should be this way, this shouldn't be this way. And then there's no more insanity, and you see things clearly, right? And that's the point, seeing things clearly. Once you see it clearly, you're good. So the two things that when you are making what most people would consider spiritual growth is that you have more peace and clarity in your life. Doesn't mean your life is perfect. Doesn't mean your family doesn't do crazy, whacked out stuff when you go visit. It means that you have more peace and clarity within your life. And the second one is that you have less craving. Craving meaning it has to be a certain way, or you have to have a certain thing. So peace, clarity, and again, as Vasista said, a cessation of craving. And the fear with that is that if you have peace and clarity and a cessation of craving, that you'll never get anything done and you'll never experience anything. That's not true, because the story keeps going on whether you've got it or not. If you want to have an adventurous life, you will have an adventurous life. If you want to just chill out and meditate and sit on your couch and play music every now and then, that's what will happen. It's the peace, the clarity, the cessation of craving is there, and life still goes on. Was I in Walmart? Where was I? I was in Walmart, and the music was playing, and there was a John Mellencamp song on, which is classic. These great things happen to us. We have these high points in our life, but then life just goes on. You can't hold on to it. Let's see if I find it here. Oh, right. John Mellencamp song. It was Jack and Diane. Let's see. Life goes on long after the thrill of living is done. Right. So we want to get caught up in that thrill, but even after the thrill passes, life still goes on. And I like your writing, example. That's how it just kind of like you're thinking about it, but then you sit down and something totally new comes out, but it's still good, right? It still works.
Yeah, I usually write it better in my head than what I do when I type it out, but I've let that go.
Well, that's a good point too, which is also why the idea of yoga, as we're looking at from the sutras, is so important, because it's like just like with music, with writing, with any skill. If you practice the skills and you get good at them, when the time comes to use them, you use them very well. Like with music, if you want to play a great solo and improvise, you can't just pick up a guitar for the first time and it comes out beautifully. You go through the scales, you learn all the particular things. So when that time comes, it can flow through you because you've built up the thing. Or with writing, if you practice writing, if you practice using certain words or certain structure, when the time comes to write, you do a hell of a lot better job doing it because you have practiced. Right. So with the Yoga Sutras and so on, this is about practicing living. So if you can meditate to the point to where you're clear, then when the time comes that you need to do something in a state of clarity, you've got that skill. You know how to do it. If you want to go do something physical or active, and you've done your Hatha Yoga practice, you don't have to worry about hurting yourself because you've already trained your body how to move in a certain way. So always think about what you want to do, and think about the skills that you need to do them. And if you need to practice them, practice them. And then when the moment comes, when you have that instantaneous, creativity or so on, it comes out just like it's in your head. Okay, how about you guys? Any final thoughts before we move on?
Well, I think what I really appreciated this morning, at least from this conversation, is you talking about that
Uh-huh.
And so now I feel like I can kind of have both.
Mhm.
I have a serious meditation practice, and I reach that point, and I get some serenity and clarity.
Mhm.
You know, I'm still going to come back here, and everything that I love and care about will still be here.
Right.
I'll still be me. And then I'm also struggling with, this is a lot of work to feel okay. You know, it feels kind of selfish in some respects. It's a lot of me. It's a lot of working on me and trying to make me better. I don't know, I still struggle with that.
I'm glad you brought up the I am nothing, I am everything, because for some reason I remember you struggling with that. And it seemed very... Remember, that's just a technique. So, I mean, and when we say I am everything, I am nothing, essentially when they say pick one and stick with it, it means you're just following that clear to the end. And if you follow one of those clear to the end, you'll figure out the other one too. So, yeah, good. Glad you got that. That was helpful. The selfishness, though, that might be something for you to contemplate, because the clearer you, like with anything, the clearer you are, the stronger you are, the more capable you are, the better you can actually assist other people when they need it. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's it does. I do see the selfishness behind it, but if I would have remained where I was when I got out of college, I would be very little help to anyone. I mean, to be honest. But by going through the process, and I don't know how helpful I am now, but when going through the process, I've seen that I have a better capacity to respond to people when they do need help. So it might just be that the more you keep going, you see that, and it becomes a direct experience. So it's no longer really an issue for you.
And another correlation I made is trying to contemplate not ever having been here.
Uh-huh.
I think that kind of tied into the I am nothing. And they're both equally scary, and that's, I think that'd be really a hard place to go.
Right.
So I'll probably choose I am everything.
Okay. Well, good. I recommend it then.